The morning after his encounter with Mariana in Lisbon, Peter woke early with a sense of purpose. The council meeting was scheduled for the following week in Porto, but his grandfather's letter from a Brasileira had contained one more cryptic reference that Peter had been puzzling over. The bravest guardian of our maritime routes lives where the waves touch the sky. Seek him before you face the council. After some research, Peter had identified the location as Nazaré, a fishing village about 120 kilometers north of Lisbon that had become world famous for producing some of the largest waves ever surfed. The town's unique underwater canyon created oceanic conditions that could generate waves over 30 meters high, drawing big wave surfers from around the world and creating a spectacle that seemed to defy the laws of nature. Peter rented a small car and set out from Lisbon in the early morning, driving north along the coast road that offered spectacular views of the Atlantic Ocean. The journey gave him time to think about everything that had happened since his arrival in Spain, and to prepare mentally for the responsibilities he was about to accept. The Portuguese coastline was dramatic and beautiful, with golden beaches, rocky cliffs, and small fishing villages that looked much as they must have for centuries. Peter found himself falling in love with this country that had given birth to his family's legacy, understanding why his ancestors had felt such a deep connection to this land and its people. As he drove, Peter thought about Mariana and the brief but intense connection they had shared in Lisbon. Her professional distance made sense given the circumstances, but he couldn't help wondering what might develop between them once the immediate pressures of the council meeting had passed. His grandfather's letter had suggested that Mariana might become much more than a professional colleague, and Peter found himself hoping the old man's intuition would prove correct. But first, there was work to be done. If his grandfather had specifically directed him to Nazaré before the council meeting, then whatever waited there must be important to his preparation for leadership. Nazaré announced itself from a distance with the distinctive sight of the Forte de São Miguel perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The fortress, built in the 16th century to protect the coast from pirates, now served as a viewing platform where tourists and locals gathered to watch the massive waves that made Nazaré famous. Peter arrived in the town around mid-morning and was immediately struck by how different it felt from the cosmopolitan atmosphere of Lisbon or Porto. This was a working fishing village that happened to have become famous, but it retained its authentic character despite the tourist attention. The lower town, along the beach, was filled with colorful boats pulled up on the sand and fishermen mending nets with the practiced efficiency of people whose families had been doing the same work for generations. Women in traditional dress, 7 skirts layered for warmth and modesty, sold fresh fish at market stalls, maintaining customs that stretched back centuries. Peter parked his car and made his way to the Forte de São Miguel, taking the funicular railway that climbed the cliff face to reach the fortress. From the viewing platform, he could see the full scope of the ocean's power, waves rolling in from the Atlantic, building in size as they approached the shore, then crashing against the rocks with explosive force that sent spray 50 meters into the air. Even on a relatively calm day, the waves were impressive. Peter tried to imagine what they must look like during the winter storms that created the legendary giant waves, and he felt a mixture of awe and fear at the ocean's raw power. "Magnificent, isn't it?" said a voice beside him in accented English. Peter turned to find an elderly man, weather-beaten and sturdy, with the look of someone who had spent a lifetime at sea. He wore a traditional fisherman's sweater and a wool cap, and his hands showed the scars and calluses of decades of physical work. "It's incredible," Peter replied. "I've never seen waves like this." "These are nothing," the old man said with a slight smile. "In winter, they are 3 times this size. Walls of water that can destroy ships and kill men who aren't careful. Or even men who are careful, if the sea decides it's their time." "You're a fisherman?" "I was for many years. Now I'm too old for the boats, so I come here to remember." The old man studied Peter's face carefully. "You have the look of someone searching for something specific. Perhaps someone specific." Peter decided to take a chance. "I'm looking for Manuel Silva. I was told he might be found near the fortress." The old man's expression shifted to one of cautious interest. "I am Manuel Silva, and you, I think, must be Thomas Matthew's grandson. You have his eyes." Manuel invited Peter to his home, a modest house on the hillside above the town with a terrace that offered stunning views of the ocean. The interior was simple but comfortable, filled with maritime artifacts, photographs of boats and fishing crews, and religious icons that spoke to the deep faith common among people whose lives depended on the sea's mercy. "Your grandfather was a good man," Manuel said as he prepared strong coffee in his small kitchen. "He came here many times over the years, always asking about the routes, always concerned that we were keeping people safe." "Routes?" Peter asked, though he suspected what Manuel meant. "The secret maritime routes that your family's network has used for centuries to move people and valuable cargo away from dangers. Routes that avoid official ports and customs inspections, that use the ocean's natural features to hide movement from those who might want to stop it." Manuel brought the coffee to the terrace, and they sat looking out at the vast Atlantic that had shaped so much of Portuguese history and identity. "I worked for your family's network for 40 years, Manuel continued. "My father worked for them before me, and his father before him. The Silva family has been helping the Mateus family since the 1500s, when we helped your ancestors move manuscripts and artifacts away from the Inquisition's reach." Peter felt the familiar weight of discovering yet another layer of his family's extensive network. "What kind of work did you do for them?" Manuel's expression became more serious. "I moved people who needed to disappear, families fleeing from situations where their lives were in danger. Sometimes I moved documents or artifacts that couldn't be trusted to normal shipping routes. And sometimes I moved money, gold, jewelry, things that could be converted to cash to help fund the network's operations." "Wasn't that dangerous?" "Very dangerous. The ocean itself is always dangerous, but when you're carrying illegal cargo and trying to avoid patrol boats and customs inspections, it becomes even more so." Manuel paused, his eyes distant with memory. "I've been in storms that should have killed me. I've outrun patrol boats in the dark. I've landed on beaches in the middle of the night to pick up families who had minutes to escape before their enemies arrived." "Why did you do it? Why take such risks?" Manuel looked at Peter with an expression that combined pride and something like sadness. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because the people I helped had nowhere else to turn. Because your grandfather convinced me that what we were doing was important enough to risk my life for." "What do you think about the courage of people like Manuel, who risked everything to help others without seeking recognition or reward? These are the real heroes of Peter's family legacy. Share your thoughts in the comments." Manuel stood and went inside, returning with a leather portfolio that looked very old and well used. Inside were maritime charts and maps that showed the Portuguese coast and the Atlantic beyond, but with notations and markings that wouldn't appear on any official navigation documents. "These are the routes," Manuel explained, spreading several charts on the terrace table. "Your ancestors spent centuries mapping currents, identifying hidden coves, learning the timing of patrols, and discovering ways to move along the coast without being detected." Peter studied the charts with growing fascination. They showed intricate details about tides, currents, seasonal weather patterns, and geographical features that could be used to hide or facilitate movement. Some routes hugged the coast, using small harbors and beaches that were too shallow or rocky for patrol boats. Others struck out into the Atlantic, using ocean currents and prevailing winds to carry vessels quickly away from European waters. "Are these routes still used?" Peter asked. "Some of them, yes. The network still needs to move people and things discreetly, though the reasons and methods have changed over the centuries. But Peter, you need to understand something important." Manuel's expression became grave. "Not everyone in your family's network wants to use these routes for humanitarian purposes. There are people who see them as opportunities for profit smuggling goods, avoiding taxes, moving money for clients who pay well regardless of whether their causes are just. You're talking about Klaus and his branch of the network." "I don't know all the names or all the politics," Manuel replied. "But your grandfather warned me that there were elements within the network who were forgetting its original mission. People who cared more about accumulating wealth than about helping those in need." Manuel rolled up the charts and handed them to Peter. "These belong to you now, as the inheritor of your family's leadership. But you need to decide how they'll be used, whether they'll continue serving humanitarian purposes, or whether they'll become just another tool for those who value profit over people. As the afternoon progressed, Manuel shared stories from his 4 decades of service to the network. Each tale revealed the human cost and the moral complexity of the work he had done. He told Peter about a family of 5 he had picked up from a beach south of Lisbon in the middle of a storm, risking his boat and his life to help them escape from people who wanted to harm them. The waves had been so large that several times he thought they would capsize, but he had gotten the family safely to a port in northern Spain where network contacts helped them start new lives. He described transporting artwork and manuscripts that had been threatened by various conflicts, wrapping them in waterproof materials and hiding them in secret compartments in his boat's hull. Some of these items had been worth millions, but Manuel had never been tempted to steal or sell them. His commitment was to the network's mission, not to personal gain. But Manuel also spoke honestly about the moral gray areas he had navigated. He had sometimes moved cargo without knowing exactly what it contained or who it was ultimately meant for. He had lied to officials, falsified documents, and broken numerous laws in pursuit of what he believed was a higher purpose. "I'm not a saint," Manuel said plainly. "I've done things that technically make me a criminal, but I've also helped save lives and preserve knowledge that might otherwise have been lost." "You'll face similar choices, Peter. Leading the network means accepting that sometimes doing the right thing requires doing things that aren't strictly legal." Peter appreciated the old fisherman's honesty. Unlike Klaus, who had emphasized the network's noble mission while downplaying its moral complexity, or João, who had focused on the intellectual and historical aspects, Manuel spoke from the perspective of someone who had actually done the difficult work. "How did you maintain your moral compass?" Peter asked. "How did you know you were making the right choices?" Manuel thought for a long moment before answering. "I always asked myself, who does this help and who does it hurt? If the answer was that it helped people who had no other options and hurt no one except perhaps some bureaucrats who cared more about rules than about human welfare, then I did it. If the answer was less clear, I consulted with your grandfather, and I trusted his judgment. What if you disagreed with his judgment? Then I didn't do it. Your grandfather understood that the network's strength came from people who chose to participate because they believed in the mission, not from people who followed orders blindly. He never forced me to do anything that violated my conscience." As evening approached, Manuel brought out one more item, a beautiful antique sextant in a polished wooden case. The navigation instrument was clearly very old and had been lovingly maintained, its brass fittings gleaming despite their age. "Your grandfather left this with me 15 years ago," Manuel explained. "He said that when his grandson came to Nazaré seeking knowledge about the maritime routes, I should give him this sextant along with the charts." Peter opened the case carefully and examined the instrument. On the base was an engraving, "Mateus Family, Never Lose Your Way, 1487. A sextant helps sailors determine their position by measuring the angle between celestial objects and the horizon," Manuel explained. In the age before GPS and modern navigation, it was essential for finding your way across the ocean when there were no landmarks to guide you. "Why did my grandfather want me to have this?" He said it was a reminder that navigating the network's complex moral waters would be like navigating the ocean. You need to constantly check your position, make sure you're heading in the right direction, and adjust your course when necessary. He said that the sextant was a symbol of maintaining your moral bearing, even when there are no easy reference points to guide you. Peter held the ancient instrument, feeling the weight of both the physical object and its metaphorical significance. His grandfather's gift was perfect, a practical tool from the maritime heritage that had shaped his family's history, transformed into a symbol for ethical leadership. "There's something else," Manuel said, reaching into the sextant's case and pulling out a small note written in his grandfather's handwriting. "Peter, if you're reading this in Manuel's home, then you've learned about the maritime routes that have served our network for centuries. These routes represent both opportunity and temptation. They can be used to help people escape from danger, or they can be used to avoid legitimate oversight and accountability. Your challenge will be to preserve the former purpose while preventing the latter abuse. Use this sextant to remind yourself to constantly check your moral position. The ocean has no mercy for those who lose their way. Neither does history. Your grandfather, Thank you for staying with us through these incredible stories of courage. Manuel's tales show that the network's humanitarian work was done by real people taking real risks, not abstract historical figures. The sextant represents Peter's responsibility to maintain his moral compass. Peter spent another hour with Manuel, asking questions about the specific routes, the network's maritime operations, and the practical challenges of moving people and cargo discreetly. The old fisherman's knowledge was encyclopedic, accumulated through decades of direct experience rather than academic study. As the sun began to set over the Atlantic, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Manuel walked Peter back to his car. "One more thing," the fisherman said as they prepared to part. "Your grandfather told me that you would face pressure to use the network's resources for purposes that don't align with its humanitarian mission. He said that some people would try to convince you that profit and humanitarian work could coexist peacefully, but that history shows they eventually come into conflict." "Klaus," Peter said, "I don't know the man, but I know the type. People who start by justifying compromises for practical reasons and end by losing sight of why the network exists in the first place." Manuel gripped Peter's shoulder with his weathered hand. "Stay true to the mission, Peter. The network has survived for 5 centuries because people like your grandfather understood that some things are more important than money or power." As Peter drove back toward Lisbon in the gathering darkness, he felt a profound respect for Manuel Silva and the countless other people like him who had served the network without recognition or reward. These were the true guardians of his family's legacy, not the sophisticated coordinators in expensive offices, but the men and women who had risked their lives because they believed in helping others. The drive back to Lisbon gave Peter several hours to process everything he had learned in Nazaré. The maritime charts and the antique sextant sat in the passenger seat, physical reminders of the new knowledge he had acquired and the new responsibilities he was accepting. Peter stopped several times at Miraduros along the coast, standing in the darkness and listening to the waves crash against the shore. The ocean that had shaped Portugal's history and his family's legacy felt both beautiful and dangerous, a perfect metaphor for the network he was about to lead. At one particularly dramatic viewpoint, Peter took out the sextant and tried to imagine his ancestors using similar instruments to navigate their way across unknown oceans, trusting in their skill and their tools to guide them safely to distant shores. The courage required for those early voyages must have been extraordinary, setting out across a vast ocean with limited knowledge and primitive technology, driven by curiosity and ambition and perhaps a touch of desperation. The parallel to his own situation wasn't lost on him. Peter was about to navigate into unknown territory himself, taking leadership of an organization he had only begun to understand, facing opposition from elements within the network who didn't share his vision, and trying to maintain a humanitarian focus in a world that increasingly valued profit over people. But Manuel's stories had given him confidence. The old fisherman had faced storms that should have killed him, had outrun patrol boats in the dark, had made split-second decisions that determined whether families lived or died. If Manuel could maintain his moral compass through 40 years of such challenges, then Peter could at least try to do the same. As he approached the outskirts of Lisbon, Peter's phone buzzed with a text message from João. "The council meeting is confirmed for next week in Porto. All members will attend. This is when you formally accept your inheritance and present your vision for the network's future. Are you ready?" Peter thought about his grandfather's letters, about Klaus's manipulation in Spain, about the humanitarian work documented in wine barrels in La Rioja, about João's steady guidance in Porto and Coimbra, about Mariana's mysterious protection throughout his journey, and about Manuel's courage in Nazaré. He typed back, "I'm ready. See you in Porto." Another message came through, this one from Mariana. "I heard you visited Nazaré. Manuel is a good man, one of the best the network has ever had. Whatever he told you, believe it. See you at the council meeting." Peter smiled at the message, appreciating that Mariana seemed to understand the significance of his visit to the old fisherman without needing detailed explanations. Perhaps that was part of what his grandfather had seen in her, an intuitive understanding of the network's values and the people who embodied them. As Peter navigated through Lisbon's evening traffic back to his hotel in Alfama, he felt more prepared for the challenges ahead than at any point since arriving in Europe. He had discovered his family's history, understood the network's complexity, and met people who exemplified the courage and integrity that had sustained the organization for 5 centuries. The council meeting would be his chance to demonstrate that he was worthy of the legacy he was inheriting, that he understood both its opportunities and its dangers, and that he was committed to preserving its humanitarian mission even when that commitment required difficult choices. Manuel's sextant sat beside him in the car, a constant reminder to check his moral position and maintain his course even when navigating through storms. The maritime charts contained knowledge that would be crucial for the network's future operations. And the stories of courage he had heard would inspire him when he faced opposition from those who valued profit over people. Peter Matthews had traveled far from the disillusioned information broker who had fled Chicago seeking escape from his past. He had become Peter Mateus, ready to accept a 500-year-old legacy and to shape it for the challenges of the 21st century. The waves of Nazare had taught him that the ocean shows no mercy to those who lose their way. The council meeting in Porto would show whether he had learned that lesson well enough to lead. Thank you for staying with us through this inspiring journey to Nazare. Manuel Silva's stories of courage showed Peter what true commitment to the network's humanitarian mission looks like. Not speeches and philosophy, but real people taking real risks to help others. The maritime charts and the ancestral sextant are more than just historical artifacts. They're tools and symbols that Peter will need as he takes on leadership. The routes can help people escape danger, but they can also be misused for profit. Peter's challenge will be to ensure the former while preventing the latter. Manuel's final warning about people who start with compromises and end by losing sight of the mission is clearly aimed at Klaus and those who share his priorities. The battle for the network's soul will come to a head at the council meeting, and Peter now has the knowledge and the moral clarity to fight for what his grandfather believed in. What do you think Peter will do with the maritime routes? Will he be able to maintain the humanitarian focus that Manuel and his grandfather valued? And how will the council members react to Peter's reformist vision? Don't miss the next episodes as Peter's journey continues with the crucial council meeting where everything will be decided. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of this incredible saga. The most important confrontation is just ahead.